us, I'd just like to say thanks to Phil and the efforts that the Barrett Values Centre has made in the years that it's been existing to explore values, and the various tools that have developed out of that have allowed us to have this presentation today. So I'm grateful for Phil taking the time out to explain one of the tools that can be used to explore values. There's obviously many, but the Barrett tools are quite well known. That's the reason why a lot of us actually came together. So a big thanks for that. And just as a matter of housekeeping for all the newcomers that have arrived, if you can just put yourselves on mute, that would be good. If you've got any questions initially, just put them in the chat area and let them queue, and we'll attend to them one at a time. So I'm going to hand over to you, Phil, and thank you again for doing this presentation today.
Great. Okay.
I'll just take myself off video for the time being.
Yeah. So, Susie, welcome to the call. So you've just arrived, and we just asked everybody during the main presentation part, if you could put yourself on mute, I'd be very grateful. So just to go back to what Jazz was saying, this is just one tool. And it is just a tool, and I want to say that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon is within the realm of beliefs. And when we measure stuff, when we're measuring values and culture, it's not the truth that we're measuring. It's a starting point for a new conversation, and it's really important to recognize that that's where we're coming from. And so let me just say a little bit about Barrett Values Centre, and I think it's a good place to start to talk about what we believe. We believe that people perform better when they can bring their whole selves to work. And I'm going to pick out one of the other statements which I think is closest to my heart, which is in the text near the bottom. We believe that human societies grow and evolve when you reduce fear, build trust, and increase love. And my deepest belief about this work is that really what we're doing is helping leaders and individuals and organizations and communities and societies to really face their fears and become conscious about the choices they're making so that they can then consciously create the lives that they want to experience. So a view of where in the world the tools are being used, and here's just a few pictures. And by the way, this whole presentation you can download. This is a page from our brochure, and you can see that the tools are actually being used all over the world in all sorts of different ways. The vast majority of our work is still with corporations and with leaders who want to help their organizations become more conscious and more values-driven. And I would say that 90% of our work is still in that area, although more and more now we're being asked to support all sorts of different initiatives and work around building values-driven society. Richard Barrett is just on his way back from Canada right now, having spent a whole week with Royal Roads University, a special degree course on values-based leadership, where he's an adjunct professor. And as you know, the tools are being used for communities and nations, and all sorts of different areas, which we'll get into now. But really back to this core idea that a huge amount of what we're doing is still in organizational transformation. And I don't see that as any different to national work, because when organizations transform, and that happens one person at a time, the ripples and impact they have on society can be very positive. So some key numbers for you. The core Barrett team is 19 people, and we're based in the UK, USA, and Sweden. I don't really consider us to be associated with any one country because we're now a virtual organization, although the headquarters was until 18 months ago in North Carolina. Over the last few years, and in fact we've got some core numbers here from 2007 up until now, we've done over 6,000 assessments. Now that would be mostly organizational assessments, but it's also leadership assessments and school assessments and national assessments. So it gives you some sense of the numbers. About 1.5 million responses across all of those. And then currently, and I checked this number last week, we've got 3,946 consultants and change agents in over 80 countries. So a consultant is someone who we consider to be external to organization who goes in to help. Change agents are people inside of organizations who are supporting the transformation from inside, and there's an increasing number of those as time goes on. Just to give you a sense of where national assessment work is happening, this is a picture of what we were up to in January 2013, and this picture is growing and changing all the time. So I'm going to now start to describe how we use the tools. And to do that, I'm a storyteller, so to do that, I'm going to tell you a tale of two companies. And in both of these companies, we were doing values assessments. Both of them are in the finance industry. They're both in North America, working under exactly the same market conditions. And on the left-hand side, Organization A, we asked the employees, select the values that most reflect how your organization currently operates. And when they responded, they said these words here: client satisfaction, making a difference, integrity, teamwork, humor, fun, quality, ethics, financial stability. Each word gets a dot on the levels. So client satisfaction is a level 2 relationship value. So the dot at level 2 on relationship is the word client satisfaction. And a spread across the levels is a good thing. It means that they're operating with what we call full spectrum consciousness. When we ask the employees in Organization B the same question, select the values that most reflect how your organization operates, they come up with a very different answer, because in our list of values they can select from, you'll see that there are positive values, and there are also what we call potentially limiting values, or in other words, fear-based values. So in Organization B, they were experiencing blame, short-term focus, internal competition, buck passing, all these limiting values. The white dots are the fear values, the limiting values. And 2 white dots in a current culture is enough to tell us it would be undermining the ability of the organization to have happy and fulfilled employees, happy customers, and delivering whatever their mission and vision is. And this many white dots, I would characterize this as a toxic organization. People will be getting physically and mentally sick in a culture like this. We have another number we call cultural entropy, which is the total percentage of all the limiting values in the survey. And in the left-hand side, 8%, actually a very healthy number. On the right-hand side, 57%, which means that 57% of the energy in that system is going into non-productive or even destructive stuff. So in which of these two organizations would you prefer to work, and which of these two do you think would be better at just looking after people and delivering high performance? And so that's really what we're looking at. By the way, quick numbers: Organization A over the same 3-year period made positive 26% return on investment. Organization B, negative 80% return on investment under exactly the same market conditions. So I talked about cultural entropy, and this is a number that we measure in all these surveys. And in rough numbers, although we have finer graduations that I'm showing you here, but in rough numbers, anything below 10% is healthy. And anything above 40%, we see organizations often go into some sort of breakdown or meltdown, even go bankrupt. And we've often seen that pattern with organizations with an entropy score above 40%. I think many of you will have either worked in or seen organizations where they write up their core values on the wall, or they put them on cards and they give them to their employees. We're able to measure the degree to which those values are lived or not. And so on the left-hand side now, I'm showing you, this is a hospital, and in fact their core values, integrity, compassion, accountability, respect, and excellence, spell I care. That's a lovely acronym for a hospital. In the values assessment, we saw 4 of those 5 words showing up: accountability, compassion, integrity, respect. This is absolutely a measure that the leaders are walking the talk, that the values are being lived. It actually took them about 4 years of integration and living this to get to this point where this was true within the current culture. Now I'm going to show you another organization where they said our core values are client collaboration, teamwork, delivery, meritocracy, integrity. And by the way, these were plastered all over the walls. This wasn't a secret. These were what we call espoused values. But when we did the measurement of the employees, the only one that showed up was client collaboration. And when they talk about meritocracy, actually what they've got is arrogance and hierarchy. And when they talk about teamwork, what they have is silos and confusion. So this was a shock to the leadership team. And I just want to dig one little bit deeper into this story, where this is the same organization, and you can see that on the left-hand side, the executive team of the organization, where sorry, this is the second one. So the executive team saw an organization that was really healthy, 12% entropy and lots of positive values. And the employees, when they were asked the question, they said, that's not the organization we work for. We work for something that is far more dysfunctional. And the executive team, good for them, because they dug in and they got on with it. And it was a bit of a shock to them, but they said, let's transform. And today, this is an organization that really is in transformation. And this was a wake-up call for them. So where does this work come from? And I'm going to make an assumption for the benefit of speed of this presentation that most of you will know about Abraham Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And before Maslow died, he said that people don't really understand what self-actualization means or how this works, and this idea needs to be expanded. And so Richard Barrett, at the time when he was reading about this, he was also reading deeply on psychology and quantum physics and chemistry and spirituality and many different fields. And when he came across this piece from Maslow, the whole thing started to slot into place. And so levels 5, 6, and 7 of the model are an expansion of the levels of self-actualization into meaningful steps that leaders and organizations and teams and schools and communities can understand and say, okay, now I understand what those steps are and what I would be doing if I were to be living those. One difference is that Maslow's needs are considered to be hierarchical. I don't consider the 7 levels of consciousness to be hierarchical, but I do consider them to be architectural. Now, what I mean by that is that it is possible to hold values up at levels 5, 6, and 7. However, unless you built a solid positive foundation with levels 1, 2, and 3, then it becomes very difficult to fulfill those. So charities, for example, who have wonderful aspirations to make a difference and be of service, unless they've got their money stuff sorted out at level 1 and their systems and processes at level 3, it undermines their ability to really be effective and deliver. So I'm going to take a few minutes to guide you through the levels and showing you what type of values fit at each level. And so level 1 is survival, and this maps exactly to Maslow's hierarchy. And so survival is really around those basic things. Am I taking care of my body? Have I got enough money to afford the basics? So it's all those basic things. But for the organization, put this into organizational speak, and you find shareholder value, organizational growth, employee health. So we alter the language to reflect the entity that we're measuring. And I'm chosen to do organizational in this sense, although if we were to talk about a national level, we'd be talking around secure boundaries or secure territory, for example. That would be a level 1 because it's within the physical realm. But for the moment, I'm going to focus on mostly personal and organizational. You'll see the red words, control, corruption, and greed. These are examples of the limiting values showing up at level 1. Survival is around relationships. This is basic stuff. For me as a person, it's about family and friendship. For an organization, it's about doing the stuff that creates good bonds. So do people say good morning to each other as they walk into the office? And do customers really feel looked after and feel that sense of just like relatedness? And if level 2 is about connectedness of relationships, then blame and manipulation would be the opposite of that, where the relationships break down. Level 3 is self-esteem, and let me just say that a huge amount of the business world is still operating at level 3, which is really the level of being the best in the world, to be the best car manufacturer or be the best whatever it is. And not many people are motivated by that anymore, and we'll get on to some of that motivation stuff. But there's a lot of be the best pride level motivation or belief that that's what motivates people still happening in businesses today. But this is the level, it's an important level, and it's important because if we train our people well to be excellent at what they do and we produce really high quality products and services, then our customers will like us, and then there's that sense of excellence within the system. And from a self-esteem perspective, if people are trained well, then they'll feel very good about themselves, and that's where organizational and personal self-esteem come together. If I go too far in that pride in performance, then I end up with arrogance or complacency, and if I go too far in systems, I end up with a bureaucracy. So level 4 is the level of transformation, and this is really where we start to ask questions. And so we're talking about level 3, as a leadership standpoint, level 3 leaders will know the answers, and level 4 leader will know the questions to ask. So they become much more of a coach in that sense. And so level 4 is characterized by the courage to challenge the status quo and create something new. And so you'll see words like continuous learning, adaptability, flexibility, personal growth, teamwork. These are all values that are really about challenging the status quo and moving forward. And at level 4, there are no longer limiting values, because level 4 is the level that we're facing our fears. Level 5, internal cohesion. For a person, this is about a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And I convert that into organizational speak, and we're really talking about shared vision. Do we truly share the vision, and are we inspired by it? And this is the level of shared values. It's all the things that create connectedness inside the organization. So when we trust each other, it bonds us together, and we can do so much more, so much faster. Humor and fun is also level 5, because it's about when we're having a good time together, it connects us together. Level 6, when I understand my purpose and I go and do that, I'm in the process of making a difference. And so we're at a evolved level of relationship building here. So level 2 would be customer satisfaction. Level 6 is about customer collaboration. And this is a higher order of relationship building where what's good for you is what's good for my customer. It's also what's good for society as well. And we're really talking about those things that make a difference. And coaching and mentoring, as I talked about before, this is really where this shows up. And leadership development would also be level 6. And finally, level 7, where making a difference becomes a way of life. We're in that space of service. And ethics is a great example there here. And is ethics practiced because of ethical compliance, or is it practiced because we truly believe this is the right thing to do deep down in our hearts? If it's about ethical compliance, I would suggest that's much more to do with level 1. If we don't do this, we're going to get hit or hurt by the regulators or lose money. So ethical compliance is actually a lower level of consciousness thing. If we're talking about ethics from we believe this is the right thing to do because in our hearts it tells us that, that's level 7. And you'll see there are other values here: future generations, long-term perspective, compassion, humility, forgiveness would be another one. So that's a quick run through the 7 levels and the type of values that fit at each level. So not only do we have organizational, as I said before, but there are different types. So this is the 7 levels of organizational. We have 7 levels of national consciousness. There's a specialized 7 levels of school consciousness for communities, for governments, and for NGOs, and even 7 levels of military service. And people are now taking the 7 levels and adapting it to all different areas. And one thing to say here is we've put the 7 levels into the public domain, and we consider ourselves to be the custodians of this work, but the 7 levels is really there for anybody to be able to take and adapt to any particular area. And we even worked with one of the beer companies who created the 7 levels of beer as a way of becoming truly conscious about running their business. And that's kind of a funny one, but we have many others where people have taken the underlying framework and adapted it to their particular industry or area of work. I know there's a team working right now on the 7 levels of religious groups or spiritual groups. One more thing to say about the 7 levels before we start to apply it is that the idea of sustainability has been coined as people and profit and planet, and the triple bottom line of sustainability. And in fact, there's an increasing number of people and organizations who are now using the 7 levels to fill in those gaps, because people, planet, and profit really map to levels 1 and 6 and 7. And in fact, there are other levels that are necessary to create real sustainability and high performance. And so many people are now considering the 7 levels as a deeper and more comprehensive framework for creating sustainability. So when you take the survey, how are we doing for time? I'll be a bit quicker. When we take the survey, there are 3 questions. Select the values that most reflect who you are, not who you desire to become. What are the values that you see in the organization now, and what values would you desire for the organization to achieve its highest performance? And when you take the survey, we keep the technology very simple so that when people take the survey, even if you're in a third world country using slower computers, the screens look very plain, but that's okay because it does the job, and we want to make sure we're supporting people wherever they are. And here are the type of values that people get to pick from, and this is how the survey itself works. And this is a result. So this is a real company in the north of England. It's a technology company. I've changed the name. But what you see here is that on the left-hand side, we see the personal values of the people. The number 1 value is honesty, with 61 people who selected that value. And it's a level 5 value. So one of the dots there up at level 5 is reflective of the word honesty. Another example would be the word family, where 37 people picked that, and it's a level 2 value, so the dot there shows you what's going on. And actually, we run a 2-day training course which really gets into the depth of this, so in the couple of minutes I have right now, I don't have too much time to get into it, but what these pictures create is a starting point for people to have new conversations. Who are the people? How do they see the culture now, the current culture, and what would they like it to be? And this really gives everybody in the organization a voice. Now, one thing to say is that in this organization, the finance director said to me, our people are unhappy and we've got a bad culture, but that doesn't cost us money. And I went back to the employees to find out what the truth of that was. And so in this follow-up survey, we asked, with regard to the limiting values, bureaucracy, confusion, empire building, information hoarding, what sort of productivity are you losing to these issues that you're seeing? And you'll see that they got written examples on the right-hand side, and they give me this percentage. Now, I averaged the numbers and gave them back to the board, to the executive team, and said, I want you to calculate how much this is costing. And they calculated these numbers. So on an income of 33 million and making an operating loss that year of $500,000, they calculated it was losing them somewhere between 13 and 14 million a year. And this was another moment of understanding that culture really does have an impact on finances and profitability. So what are the tools we have in our kit bag? For individuals, we have the personal values assessment. This is free of charge to everybody. One of my personal beliefs is that less than 10% of the world's population have ever been asked the question, what are your personal values? And so we wanted to make this free of charge to everybody, regardless of the ability to pay, so that they can understand what their values were and what the foundation of their daily decision making was coming from. We also have the individual values assessment and the leadership values assessment, which is more of a 360-degree instrument, and a derivative of the leadership values assessment, which can be driven much deeper into organizations because we've automated that and reduced the price dramatically. One of our beliefs around pricing is what we call the economics of enough. We want to earn enough money to pay ourselves fairly and to reinvest, and yet when we've done that, we want to push our prices down to make the tools accessible to as many people as possible. So group assessments, you'll see we have the cultural values assessment, which is used in corporations and NGOs and governments. and the small organization assessment, which we've just launched, again with the idea that in fact 90% of the world's organizations have got less than 20 people, and we wanted to produce something that would make this accessible to as many organizations as possible. National values assessment and community values assessment and even school values assessments. And as I said before, there are other derivatives of these, but these are really the major tools that are in the kit bag. When you get the results, you get reports that look something like this, and you get a fully written report as well. So I just want to touch for a moment on leadership transformation and a core belief we hold that organizational transformation starts with the personal transformation of the leaders. And if the leaders are operating with they've done their work and they kind of know who they are, and they're operating from a space of deep understanding, that shows up in the culture. And we've got also 7 levels of leadership consciousness. You can get these slides so you can study this afterwards if you want. But this is a real situation where on the left-hand side we did a leadership values assessment where this leader, 14 assessors, picked the values of blame and power and demanding and manipulative to describe how their leader was operating. And then we saw the culture of the organization, and it was a reflection of the leader. So on the left-hand side, this is a 360 degree of the leader. On the right-hand side, this is the culture that that leader was creating. And so we see this pattern regularly, that the fears of the leader create the culture of the organization, or vice versa. And this is a real survey. On the left-hand side is a 360 of a leader. On the right-hand side, you see the culture that that leader is creating. Now, I want to say something very briefly about all the fears that exist within human beings can be captured within these 3 very short statements. At level 1, I don't have enough. And this is about I don't have enough, as it says here, money, safety, protection, health, food, etc., to satisfy my need for survival. So a lot of human fears come from, and dysfunctional behaviors come from, this belief that I don't have enough. Level 2 is I'm not loved enough. I don't have enough love, caring, attention, etc. to satisfy my need for belonging. And level 3, which can be the most disruptive and dysfunctional because it sits very deep in our psyche, often coming from childhood stuff, I am not enough. I do not have enough power, authority, or respect to satisfy my need for self-esteem. And this will show up in things like you look at somebody else and you say, I'll never be as good as they are. And so that's really, you can, by the way, if anybody disagrees and they've got other examples of fears that don't fit within these 3, we'd love to find them because we're always wanting to challenge our work. But this is what we've discovered, that really there are really only 3 human fears, and every other fear is a subset of these 3. And our job is to really understand these within each human being and help them to understand themselves. So finally, I want to say something about whole systems change. When you've measured this, then what do you do to make a change? And we've taken Ken Wilber's model in order to understand, and I'm using Richard Branson and Virgin here as an example. So this helps us understand what is the job of leaders in creating change. And so at the top line, at the top line, you can see personality and character. So on the top left, you can't see what's in Richard Branson's mind. You can't watch his values. You can't watch his beliefs, but you can watch his behaviors on the right-hand side. And so you've got the internal and the external of the person, the internal and the external of the organization. And so from this, there's really only 4 things we're looking for in the whole field of everything to do with personal and organizational transformation. These are the 4 alignments. The first is personal alignment. Are the leaders walking their talk? Do they know what's going on in here, and are they able to express that through their words and their actions and what they create? Second is values alignment. Do I feel a sense of alignment to the organization? People do our values assessment and they say, you know, for 10 years I've had this feeling where I didn't fit, and now it's absolutely clear to me my values don't map the values of the organization. And so that's another piece of clarity that comes. So do the personal values of the people match to the to the values of the organization. Mission alignment is when I understand my own purpose. Why am I here? What is my purpose? Can I fulfill that? Can I live that by fulfilling the mission and vision of the organization? And when you can, your energy for showing up and work and doing something significant is far greater. And finally, structural alignment, when we know what the vision, mission, and values and strategy of the organization is, then we only do things that are in alignment with that. Who we hire, how we hire them, how we pay them, the products we produce, the way we build our buildings, everything has to become in alignment with the vision, mission, values, and strategy. Bottom line, that's it. So if you take this very simply, you get a change in the leader's values and behavior that changes the culture, and that has the ripple effect out into society. Now, we try to, of course, this is much more, there's much more depth to this than maybe I'm describing in here. I'm trying to stay at a higher level. But overall, what we're looking at is you create a values assessment, you share the results and start a dialogue, you prioritize what are the key things we want to focus on, and perhaps you can't focus on more than 2 or 3 things in a year, and then you explore the values and behaviors and you create a plan and you put that to work and you go and live it. And this is really about building the culture of the organization in just in the same way as you would create any other. Let me say one thing. We often talk about organizations who measure their culture on an on an annual basis, just as they would measure their finances. And so this is a process that happens each year to bring the culture deeper and deeper and more to life. What's the key to this? At every stage, it has to be about dialogue. Every stage in here is people talking to each other or expressing their views. Nothing changes without dialogue. So case studies, you can find these on our website, but this for me is the important bit. All of that other stuff is just the starting point to creating outcomes of either higher performance in a business or happier people or both or some level societal outcome. And so there has to be the so what, and these are the so whats that come from that. And so Unilever Brazil had like dramatic changes in their performance, and as it says here, much happier staff. And Black Hawk, which is a whole medical system over in the USA, remarkable results by getting into much deeper dialogue with their people, which is what these tools created. We've got all sorts of data that shows financial returns between ordinary organizations and organizations who are consciously becoming conscious. And this is one of my favorites where, my phone's about to ring. Sorry about this. So this is one of my favorite stories. I'm going to pick it up and put it down. It's my second phone under my desk. So somebody went to a meeting in London and heard someone talking about the 7 levels, and a week later they created this article in the UK Adoption magazine. This is one of the best articles I've ever read about the application of the 7 levels for helping adoptive parents much better and connect to their adoptive children. And this is a great example of how people are taking the work and applying it in different ways. So final, there's a whole series of books that come behind this, and Liberating the Corporate Soul, or A Guide to Liberating Your Soul in 1995. Liberating the Corporate Soul was really the piece of work that put this work on the map from a corporate perspective. And you can see there's a whole series of books. The latest one, there's 2 books that are going to be published this year. The Values-Driven Organization, which takes Liberating the Corporate Soul and Building a Values-Driven Organization and brings that up to date. And finally, Get Connected, which is a book, as it says here, a practical guide to grow a desired team culture. So Get Connected, we're going to make free of charge for all consultants, all change agents, and all leaders. It'll be free of charge from our website because it's a book that's packed with tools and materials and workshops and exercises to help people to really create the cultures they want. And once again, we wanted to make that freely available so that everybody can start to live this journey for themselves. So, that's it for now. That's really all I wanted to say. I'm going to go back to the home screen, and I would invite any questions, any thoughts, anything you want to go deeper into. And Jazz, as the moderator, maybe you'll come back on video as well.
I will. Maureen's got a question. You mentioned something about how the 7 levels and Barrett value approach is being used in helping the military, and she's liked to ask if you can say a few more things about that.
Yeah. So what happened was we had 2 approaches at the same time, one from the Israeli army and one from the UK army, who hasn't actually gone anywhere yet, but we're in discussions with. There is one aspect of military purpose that has come, which is there's an organization in North America called Purple Star, and they are set up to help returning servicemen in the US coming back from war and reintegrate into their families and reintegrate into society. And so there's 2 of their team members who've been on the CTT training courses because they understand how deeply this is a values-based conversation, helping soldiers to get back in touch with their values of who they are and their family and society. And so they're using that thinking. And one of the major things that they're trying to stop is that I think it's 1 every 80 seconds in the USA. Every 80 seconds, a US serviceman is taking their life, is committing suicide. And there are more servicemen coming back committing suicide than are dying in the field of combat. And so that team over in the States are now using the 7 levels thinking to help servicemen come back and reintegrate into their families and to society. Maureen,
do you want to put on your microphone, and then perhaps if there's any comments that you want to make on that, then you can do that. So just take yourself off mute and just have a direct conversation with Phil and I.
I think all I'd like to say is thank you for that, Phil. That was new information for me, which is one of the things I love about Barrett Values Centre. They're always coming up with new things, and that's why, in part, I wanted to listen in today, because I knew there would be learning for me. So I've already got that piece of learning, and I think that's an absolutely fantastic use of the tools. And I'd like to think more about it, so thank you for that explanation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Nigel has asked if you can explain a little bit more about the link with between profits and values. Can you come on and stick your thing back on, Nigel?
Just wanted to ask, in the business world,
Yep.
there's an extremely strong skepticism to all of this type of work.
Yep.
And it all stems around the issue about whether the level 1, do we make profits as a result of it? And it's with that information, it opens people's eyes or minds.
Yeah.
Is there somehow through the UKVA we can get the statistics or the information so that we can start disseminating it to businesses to open their minds? Because I think that's one of the key drivers that will open people's minds to this type of thinking.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just say something about that, but I'll also point you to where a lot of the research and growing research, not just from us and from others, that I'm going to grossly generalize now that in the European time zone, many more people are saying to us, we think this work is important, but we don't know how to do it. Please show us how to do it. In the American time zone, we hear mostly, show us how this work is going to make us more money. And consequently, we do relatively a small amount of work in the USA. Now, I'm generalizing because there are some remarkable organizations in the USA who are really driving forward on this whole idea of consciousness. And in fact, one of the areas of work I'd refer you to, you probably already heard about it, is conscious capitalism. And the book Firms of Endearment, and the latest book, which is called Conscious Capitalism by Raj Sisodia and John Mackey. And there's a lot of data in these books that shows how conscious organizations, values-driven organizations who take care of all stakeholders, become more financially successful as well. And one of my good friends said to me, if you're running a call center and you've got either a group of highly switched on and engaged employees or highly switched off and demotivated employees, and it's 2 minutes to 5 in the afternoon and the phone rings, which group of employees would you prefer to be picking up the phone at that moment? And so, in a way, it's kind of obvious, and most of us on this call will know that this stuff is obvious. So, where do you get all this stuff? We've got a number of reports on our website, but if you email me, Nigel, then what I will do is I'll send you links to some of the core research, both ours and from other people, that is coming out now that really show that conscious and values-driven organizations are more financially successful.
So I will take it on myself to make sure that that's very, very widely disseminated.
Good, thank you, Nigel.
Something, Phil, I think it's important. I've seen quite a few of the slides where you see the statistics. We're living in the age of the infographic, where on Facebook, for example, some key points are usually put in a graphical form into an illustration, and then before you know it, in a viral way that spreads all over the world.
Right.
I think I personally would love to see something like that for values in terms of the statistics and how it's relevant for a lot of different things. Do you have any? If you don't, I was just going to offer. It's something I've done a lot of in terms of creating infographics, and if you've got some already, though, it would be great to get those to start being disseminated.
We don't. I love the idea. I'd happily accept your offer. So yes, please. I'd love to do that because, again, we're really about sharing this stuff out there. So yes, please, Jazz. I'd love to work with you on that.
Great. Lindsay asked how exactly do people pick values, and also with regards to Charles, he mentions later on, what you seem to be doing is kind of helping people to pick values. But from what I understand, in terms of the way you pick values, do you explicitly tell them in advance this is a bad value or this is a good value? I don't think you do you?
No, we don't. So, Lindsay, are you there? Could you?
I am.
Oh, wonderful. So say a little bit more about what you're asking.
So what I'd really like to understand is about the questions that you ask when you're identifying values in an organisation. So are individuals presented with a list of values to choose from that they can then sort of select what they recognise in their organisation, or are they, do you ask sort of really open questions and see what words they come up with? So it's really just trying to understand how that happens.
Yeah, it's the first where for each survey we do, we customize a template of values for that organization. And so the customization process looks at various things like what industry they're in. So in a bank we'd have customer satisfaction, in a hospital we'd have patient care. It also looks at the core values that the organization says it stands for. And then we go through a complete customization process to create a list. And you can see this is actually a personal values list on the screen at the moment, but I'd happily show you an organizational one as well. But this is the way that it works. There's usually between 80 and 100 words in that list that has been customized in conjunction with the consultant and the client, so that it becomes a reflection of the type of possibilities the culture might be, and they then get to choose from those words.
Okay, so up to 100 words they would choose from, and does that include the limiting values that you describe, or are those words that the individuals come up with themselves?
No, it also includes the limiting values, and so in this list here you will see number 17. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, let me just move the thing. Okay.
So number 17 on that list is the word control. Now, control is not necessarily a bad thing. We'll be really clear. We call these potentially limiting values. So control in a pharmaceutical factory is not just a good thing, it's a legal requirement. However, if control starts to creep into our relationship and I feel the need to control you, it probably means that trust has broken down, within our culture, within our relationship, and therefore it becomes potentially limiting in that sense. And so what we don't put in the personal values list is values like blame or manipulation, because people don't pick those. They won't associate themselves with that, but they do often have words like control, or what would be another one, image, certain things that have that. Oh, being liked is a good one. In fact, that was when Richard did the first values assessment of me, I picked being liked. I really got a deep understanding of how being liked, the overwhelming desire to be liked had a very negative impact on lots of my behaviors and relationships. And that came to light by my picking that and seeing a white dot on my chart. And then it started a process of me understanding how my need to be liked was actually getting in the way of positive relationships. So that would be an example. But then in the organizational
example,
yeah,
Phil, where you've got kind of a bit of a Trojan horse, where you look at something, you think it's positive, like being liked,
yeah,
but what it doesn't really reveal is an underlying, pathology, and that's really something that's not healthy at all.
Right. It was triggering my I am not loved enough fear, and so that was what it was driven by.
See, for me, all values are positive, and it's the behaviours that are limiting or negative.
Right.
So I have been, since I saw your first presentation, I have been struggling with the concept of a limiting or negative value, because for me, all values are positive. It's just the behaviours that we use that may be positive or negative, so either enhancing the value or detracting from that value.
I completely agree with you. I also think that, but let me give you two things. One is in the question. You'll notice the question says, "Please select 10 of the following values/behaviors." So we're recognizing that this list is a combination of values and behaviors.
Okay.
The other thing
there is a paper, Lindsay, that Karen Blakely distributed, which I've been reading recently, and it's been quite enlightening. And it talks about what values actually are, and it compares them with what things that are often mistaken, or what they say conflated with, things like needs, for example, traits, and other things. And it's worthwhile to actually read through it, because if you want to get clarity on the exact nature of what values are and what things are often confused as values, it's an amazingly comprehensive paper in that regard. I think Karen's on the mailing list.
I have it. I've started reading it. I'm working my way through it. It's quite a heavy document, so I'm working my way through it. But I have clarity in my mind. I have clarity in my mind of what values are. I just struggle with this concept of limiting values, that we've been hearing about, and I just, for me, it's the behaviours. The blame is about the behaviours that are working against the value of accountability. So I see that as a limiting behaviour rather than an actual value itself. So I really appreciate you sharing the work of the Values Centre, because it's just very stimulating to have these kind of discussions, so thank you.
I completely agree on your
You've got behaviours written there, Phil.
Yeah.
As well as values, because I think that covers your base.
It does.
Charles, thanks a lot, Lindsay. Charles, you've mentioned something about, well, you've got all this picture of values, but how do you actually go and get about people adopting what might be, the positive values, the better values? What happens in that process, Phil, with Barrett Values Centre, once you've got this picture, how do you go about and actually implementing change with it?
Charles, just say a little bit more about your question.
Well, I think, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think that my question is actually partly a clarification. As I understand it, what you're doing is concentrating on whether values are aligned with behavior, whether thought, word and deed is aligned in both personal and in organizations.
Yep.
And that's the question of consciousness, isn't it?
Yes.
Rather than making a judgment about whether the values that you start off with are the right values, I put sort of right in inverted commas, whether they're right values or wrong values.
Right.
So, for instance, if I'm in to take an absurd example, if you're looking at a criminal organization, their values would be, you know, how to maximize the returns to the organization, notwithstanding any harm that might be done to non-members or society at large, or, you know, whether we kill, maim, or steal. Their values might be quite antipathetic to us, might they not? You might think they're rotten values, but they might be very well aligned. The members of that organization might all have the same we'd say rotten values, and they may give expression to them in a totally consistent way. Their values might be well aligned between the individual aspirations or the individual values and the social, the corporate values of that organization. So, and that's fine. I mean, I just make that comment, and you'll be able to do your exercise on them and say, this is great, you know, you've got absolute alignment. Now, what you would also probably say, I would guess, is that you know, there's probably other things going on there. There's not love, there's probably a lot of fear in there as well. And my question is really, to what extent does a judgment about whether values are, let's just say, positive or negative, come into your whole modus operandi?
Well, the first thing is that I'm always going to put the word potentially in front of limiting. So we always talk about potentially limiting values, and really what we're being is provocative in saying that. We're not saying these are good, bad, or anything else. We're saying, to what extent is this holding back your organization, your people, your performance? And it's really up to people to make their own judgment about that. And so for us, what we do, the words that we mark as being potentially limiting are those that in general understanding of language have got that possibility to be detracting from either happiness or performance. And so it really is up to individuals to make their own judgment. And so this is one of the things that's different about the cultural transformation tools, that we have no starting point of saying this is good. Many tools will say you need this much teamwork, this much communication, this much operational stuff, and you're measured against somebody else's view of what's good. Within CTT, people create their own vision of what's good through their desired culture,
Sure.
And they measure that against their current culture of where they are right now. And so they create both their picture of where they are now and where they want to be, and they have their own choices about how they achieve fulfilling that gap between them.
But you seem to be making some sort of judgment. Sorry, I understand broadly that this is a methodology, and you know, it looks as though it's an effective one and very interesting one. What I'm really trying to get at is to understand what you're doing and what you're not trying to do. And what you're not trying to do, you're saying, is you're not trying to make a judgment. Although you do talk about love and fear, so presumably you're making some sort of judgment that love is good, fear is bad, which is probably fair enough. But there are judgments in there, aren't there? And so you've got some fundamental values in there, haven't you? Even though you say you haven't. Love is good. All the sort of related values to love, you know, caring, compassion, concern for others, helping the society. You've got a lot of that in there. Fear is bad, and you've got a lot of that, those related bad values in there. So I'm a little bit confused. I'm not sure this is a you know any great problem, but I just really trying to clarify where you actually stand on this, because I mean my view on values is to do with or where I'm coming from is to do with, I guess, making some judgments on what are good and what are bad.
Right.
And it seems to me I'm not totally sure whether you are or you aren't. I don't really mind whether you are or you aren't, but I just want to be clear which it is.
Well, let me say my personal belief system holds love and fear exactly as you described it, although I would struggle with good and bad, because I think that's a different concept. So love and fear already hold those
positive
concepts.
or
yes,
negative.
Positive or limiting. And however, if I go right back to some of the examples you gave before, if an organization says our number one aim is to make as much money as we can, and they publish that. They say, this is our vision, is to make as much money as we can. And they achieve that through their values, and their values are consistent with that. I would say they're in integrity. They're doing what they set out to do, and they're telling you what they set out to do. If we take the example of people who are committing crime, this, for me, is a very interesting situation where which is about levels of consciousness, and levels of consciousness also connect to how big is my world. Is my world only as big as my family? And that house down there, that's not my world. They're different people. I don't associate myself with them. So it's okay for me to go to that house down there and rob them and bring it back. When I get home, my values are still family and caring and sharing, so I can share the spoils within here. So the bigger my worldview, the bigger my consciousness grows to see that I'm connected to my entire village, my entire city, or my country, or even the planet. When my consciousness gets to that level, and I see that I am connected to and part of everything else, then my values would then morph to be respectful of that entire whole. And so if I were to make, and again, I can't even use the word judgment, but I will do in this sentence. If I were to make one judgment about this and one core, it's really about the evolution of human consciousness. And love and fear are just one factor within that. But really our work is about supporting people in evolving their consciousness so that they can then make their own choices and their own judgments about what they want to do and who they want to be.
It seems to me there's an implicit judgment there, very clearly. But anyway, I'll leave it there because again, I'm talking too much.
There probably is.
Very clear. There's very clear implicit judgment, I think, comes out. Anyway,
okay.
Good. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
I think you highlighted something there, though, Charles, which is important about what we've been talking about with regards to positive and negative, which is that the values, the genuine spirit of what we consider to be values, as opposed to some of the things that people have been referring to, like traits or behaviors, is that values often help you get clarity and help you more clearly distinguish between things, so you can make your own judgments for things. However, those other things which might be called limiting values or traits or fears, often they do the opposite. They don't make things clearer. They actually remove information and make it more difficult for us to work with the truth, which is really important if you want to do things from a compassionate point of view. And this is what entropy ultimately in science, it's mentioned in Barrett measures, it's actually what is referred to in science as well, that entropy is actually a lack of ordered information. A body is ordered information, and a community, a society is a body of ordered information in a way. So anything that removes information or disorders it, in my opinion, is probably something that's not what would be called a positive value or a genuine value as such. It's probably something else that is more sinister. And Phil, what do you reckon about my kind of perception of that?
Yeah. I was sorry, because I'm very stuck right now on challenging myself around judgment and this word judgment. So I'm sorry, Jazz. I was listening to what you were saying, but I was also deep in my own thoughts at that very moment about Charles.
Can I just say something a little bit more?
Yeah.
This is Charles. I think where judgment comes in is that life is about making choices, isn't it?
Yes.
And that means judgments. And values are the basis on which we make judgments.
Yeah.
Aren't they? There are our beliefs or principles upon which we make judgments, and which make choices, and we can make good choices or bad choices. Now, good or bad is a loaded thing because it depends on where we want to go, I guess, with our life.
Yeah.
But there again, that comes back to values. And do we want to go towards consciousness? Do we want to go towards less consciousness? Do we want to go towards more caring and sharing and loving, or not? That's all a matter of, it comes down to values. And the values lead to what we use to make the choices that we make in life, whether they're large choices in the overall direction of our life or small choices every day, every hour, every minute.
Yeah. If I were to get very, and I'm just trying to now associate myself with judgment within this, and I'll give you an example. When I presented the results in Venezuela of the Venezuela National Values Assessment, and I got stopped at going out of the country by 2 armed government officials who were really upset with me for what I had said, I guess I made a judgment in that situation that I don't like being in Venezuela right now, and I'm not going to go back until the current form of government is not operating there, because I found that a very, very fearful moment. And so in that sense, absolutely, I was making a judgment in that situation. So anyway, I'm going to reflect more deeply on this, Charles. Thank you for opening this up for me.
Can I just, it's Hazel, can I
It's
add
raised an
something?
important point about judgment, though, is values certainly can be used for judgment, but maybe it's another discussion where this is partly what Nigel will perhaps be talking about on the 15th, what values actually are and their properties and their kind of effects. But judgment is certainly one of the things that you can do with values, but I think there's a lot more things that can be served by values, and I'd say perhaps that's another longer conversation. Sorry, you were going to say something?
Oh yeah, sorry, is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
It just came to my mind as we were talking about it that if you take away the judgment of what's good and bad, and you objectively look at it, if I decide to run
Sorry,
something
this is Hazel, I presume.
yes, it's Hazel, sorry. If I decide to operate in a way that, for example, we would call fearful, which you could call a judgment, I don't think it is. I know that, say, that stress will impact on my body. I know that it will cause entropy, like we say, it will cause a problem, and therefore objectively that is not as beneficial. It's not necessarily even a judgment. If your consciousness has come from a place where you just observe and you notice that it's happening, it doesn't mean you judge it. It just means that you have a choice and then a consequence as to what the result is. So I know if I'm super stressful, that will cause a problem for me but the other people around me. And it's not, then it comes, I may not be making a lot of sense, but for me then it's just down to
I think you are, Hazel, because, I mean, as it says on the tin, it's an assessment, cultural values or personal values assessment, not personal values judgment. So I think you're right. It's meant to be an observational tool from which you're meant to act. What do you say to that, Phil?
Yeah, actually, in the early days, Richard called this an audit, and I said to him, Richard, I think I said there's a lot of judgment in the word audit, which I was uncomfortable with. And so we changed it from an audit to an assessment for that very reason, actually. Hazel, you just described what I was so inarticulately trying to just say.
Well, it's just, you know, and the thing is, if somebody comes from a place where they're judging those things, and, you know, we often all get in the day say, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and that's not right, but actually when you step back from things and look at things and don't judge them, they just are what they are.
Yeah.
And then you make, from that, you can then make a more aligned, and if you want to call it balanced choice, and then the outcome is from that. So I know if I act in a certain way, it will impact on people, and therefore that will cause an issue.
Yeah.
Well, Maureen's got some interesting things to that about. I'm
just
sure,
one second.
One of the things that she mentioned was about mindfulness, and in my experience, I've looked at the tools, and that they're really an attempt for you to become mindful about your values and your behaviours, and in that sense, it's a great tool to help people establish a kind of coordinate for where they're at.
I just want to honour the fact that we said this would be an hour session, and if there's people who want to leave, then let's for the moment consider this closed. And at the same time, because we can work with him with multiple possibilities, I'm totally happy to stay online for anybody else who wants to continue talking. But I just wanted to honour the fact that we're a bit over.
Thank you for that, Phil. It's Maureen speaking. Could I just say that this is obviously a huge subject, which is why it's going to take up part of the agenda of the meeting on the 15th, and look forward to that, given the little bits that I've heard today. I've noticed, however, that Anne had a question, and I wondered if we could address that if Anne is still on the call.
Yes, Anne, you were mentioning about the SDI, I believe, and how do values actually relate to, is it SDI? I think it is, worldviews. What's SDI, sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear
Good,
you.
thank you. Thank you, Maureen. Appreciate that bringing me in. Spirodynamics integral.
Oh, right.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah.
Recently I've been involved in some work that Bjarne Johnson came over,
Right.
who I think you know as well.
I know.
And I'm interested, and we've been doing some citizens movement work here, and love to link that into the recent survey that's been done at the UK level. So really just trying to gauge how the values map against worldviews, and already I'm beginning to get a sense of that around you know, the sort of red worldview, which is like the gang culture, which you were, you know, and so the priority code of each worldview is different, says Don Beck.
Yes.
So really, how does it map across so that we could use it as a tool for democratic development?
Good. Okay. Well, I have to say that if you know Bjarne, you probably know the one person on the planet that knows more about the connection between CTT and spirodynamics than anybody else. So
Okay.
you already know the right person. But let me give you my. I know about spirodynamics. I'm not certified in that system, but I know enough to be dangerous, as they say. And so. When we first started doing the mapping of these tools together, in fact, Don Bechter came to one of our workshops in Colorado early in 2002, and we spent about 4 days really mapping these things together. And we thought at first that we were mapping the levels kind of vertically against the spirodynamics memes, and that really wasn't working. Because in both the systems, higher is not better. You've got to have some of that foundational stuff in order to operate at the higher levels. And so what we found was that it became more of a matrix where we put the 7 levels of consciousness on one side, and we put the memes, the spirodynamics colors across the bottom, and we were then able to map what type of values someone would be operating and living, and how they might be doing that within this matrix. And actually, that's published in the book called Building a Values-Driven Organization. There's a whole chapter on that. If you would like it, I can just send you that chapter from the book.
That would be brilliant.
Okay. Could you drop me an email? I don't know. It's phil@valuecentre.com, and just let me know what you're looking for, and I'll happily send you that chapter. I have to say that I think the thinking and the practice of this has moved on so far that I would strongly recommend that you also have this conversation with Bjarne as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And Maureen and I are connected, you know, based in Scotland, which is good from the citizens movement as well, and hoping that this becomes like an exploration based on what you did in Scotland.
Good. So
really interesting.
And are you with So Say Scotland?
I volunteer with them. I actually work with the Scottish Police Service, would you believe, and would love.
Okay.
And you were moving to a single police service. I don't know if you picked up on that.
No, I hadn't heard that. But
right, we've got 8 police forces merging to 1 on the 1st of April, and I would love to use the values work as we progress through that momentous change. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. Just 2 things to say. One is that we've done work in a number of police departments around the world, and the second is that 7 levels of military service, although it's phrased in military word, that idea of service also would apply to the police as well. And so you're very welcome to get examples of police values assessments, but also to have that 7 levels of military service work, if you would like. It would need some thinking and modifying to make it more police friendly, but it's the basic thinking is there.
Thank you. I'll write to you.
Okay.
Phil, just as a matter of timing also, it might be a good idea to probably stop the recording.
Okay.
Otherwise people are going to have too much to watch. You know, so the core of the material which is presented around the tools has been done, and we've had some decent discussion around it, so this would probably be a good time to at least stop the recording.
Okay. Actually, I can just edit that down, so if somebody else has got some startling, wonderful insight that's still going to come, then we can, but I can cut it at whatever point, so we're okay to move a little bit.
All right. Okay. Now, Nigel, you wanted to say some more things?
The conversation's gone on, so I'll probably...
All right. All right. Okay. If anybody else doesn't have any questions, then this would probably be a good time to bring things to a close. We are going to extend this conversation, as Maureen suggested, in the meeting that we're going to have later in the week. So if you can make it, do come along, and you'll get to explore this a little bit more in depth. But for today, I'd just like to say thank you to each one of you for contributing and asking questions that you have. And of course, last but not least, say a big thank you to Phil, Clothier, and the Barrett Values Centre for all the work they've done and for the time they've taken today to inform us about their work.
Jazz, thank you too for you hosting this meeting and for all the passion you're putting into this as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.